Well, just 4 hours ago, by my time here, Pope Francis released the post-Synodal Apostolic Exhortation. It's been much bandied about, much anticipated, and as always, Pope Francis delivers. Now, I'm going to read to you the most important paragraphs in the document, which are right at the beginning, people. Everyone follow my logic here. It's important to say that over the last 2 to 2.5 weeks, there's been a lot of jockeying for position that was created, a discomfiture and an adaptation. If you're a football fan, it's an audible that's been called at the last minute here because of the book released by Pope Benedict and Cardinal Robert Syrah, From the Depths of Our Hearts. Now, Edward Penton reported that at the time, Dave and I did a show on this. I think it's episode 23 of Rules for Retrogrades. We're going to do back-to-back analysis here because his Apostolic Exhortation, Currida Amazonia is the name of it, by the way, is chock full of weaponized ambiguity, and so differing interpretations is absolutely necessary. What I was saying is that a couple weeks back, Edward Penton reported that it was not, and this was a quiet report, that it was not George Gonswine who was acting on his own behalf when he was asking Pope Benedict to get rid of his name from the authorship title of the book, From the Depths of Our Hearts, co-authored with Cardinal Robert Syrah, but that he was acting on behalf of Pope Francis. We know that in between then and now, George Gonswine has been taken out of commission. No one quite knows where he is in action in Rome. And this is conspicuous, as always. If it weren't conspicuous, it would be conspicuous. Constant Romanida, the Romans' term for political jockeying. What we know is this, and then I'll get into this document, Currida Amazonia, by Pope Francis. He was really upset that Pope Benedict Emeritus and Cardinal Syrah wrote this book, simply defending, in the maybe poetic terms, but in the most banal way, the discipline of priestly celibacy, which is well established in the church for over 1,000 years. Why would this be a big deal, right? Here's why. Because Francis had, by all accounts, reduplicated paragraph 111, which I'm going to read you, from the final synod document, word for word, in the completed draft. He completed work on this 3 weeks ago, the post-synodal exhortation. There's the final synod document, doesn't have an official name, and then the exhortation, which is being released today, February the 12th. It was released at noon Rome time. Paragraph 111, as well as the other troublesome paragraph 103, which was never reportedly reduplicated, like word for word, in the final, in the exhortation, has been removed, right? So it was circulated to bishops about a week and a half ago. Since then, it's been removed. We got an account by the U.S. bishops 2 days ago, 2.5 days ago on Sunday, saying, Pope Francis's critics and people wanting something extraordinary to look at, to gawk at, and to bandy about afterwards will be disappointed. And LifeSite reported on that. Bear all this in mind. There was too much heat for the Currida Amazonia to come out without weaponized ambiguity, and this is the way that Francis operates anyway. Everyone, let me just say this morning. I got my initial info from LifeSite, but even with that, LifeSite, the great reportage coming from there, everyone seems to be missing the angle that Pope Francis essentially says, look, I'm officially presenting to the faithful. I want everyone to go read it, the final document, but I'm not going to cite from it. He says that in paragraphs 2 and 3 of this thing. And then the rest of the document is, as far as I'm concerned, juridically worthless. And, because he doesn't cite, he doesn't actually pull quotations from the final synod document, even the likes of LifeSite, who's sufficiently suspicious of Pope Francis to satisfy anyone, to satisfy me, they don't think that this constitutes they say it's dangerous, but they don't seem to think that the Apostolic Exhortation by itself constitutes an explicit endorsement of whatever we are afraid of, kind of abrogation of priestly celibacy in the Amazon opened up to all the world, maybe female deacons. Here, well, let's read from the document itself. I would disagree with them. I disagree sharply. Not a lot of people are out there saying it the way I'm going to say it. I think this is a relatively clear case. So hear me out. During the Synod, I, Francis, this is him directly writing to us, an Apostolic Exhortation, I listened to the presentations and read with interest the report of the discussion groups. In this exhortation, I wish to offer my own response to this process of dialogue and discernment. I will not go into all of the issues treated at length in the final document, nor do I claim to replace that text or duplicate it. This is probably a reference to the leaked reportage that paragraph 111 was absolutely duplicated line by line in the final, what was the penultimate iteration of the document. We thought it was the final document before, an hour ago, 2 hours ago when I read this. I'll continue. I wish merely to propose a brief framework for reflection that can apply concretely to the life of the Amazon region, a synthesis of some of the larger concerns that I've expressed in earlier documents, that can help guide us to a harmonious, creative, and fruitful reception of the entire synodal process. Paragraph 3. So he's just said, you're not going to see any direct reduplications of the Synod document, which people who know to look are expecting. At the same time, I would like to officially present the final document, capital F, capital D, which sets forth the conclusions of the Synod, which profited from the participation of many people who know better than myself or the Roman Curia the problems and the issues of the Amazon region, since they live there, they experience its suffering, and they love it passionately. Boilerplate. I have preferred not to cite the final document in this exhortation because I would encourage everyone to read it in full. Now I'll restate the beginning of this. At the same time, I would like to officially present the final document which sets forth the conclusions of the Synod, and he wants us all to go read it. Okay, so take a breath. What does that mean? And again, LifeSite does its due diligence, as always. It makes all these connections for us. It puts all the dots in a nice line. And there are a few more dots I'll talk about in a moment. But it doesn't draw the line through those dots. As a whole is talking, I guess the editorial staff is talking today, like everyone else, that to the effect that this is a whiff. I guess American liberals are mad if you go to National Catholic Reporter. They're mad. This is gratifying enough, drink them liberal tears. But everyone's, overlooking the purloined letter on the mantle, where the thief in Edgar Allan Poe's famous story hides the letter right on the mantle. Same thing happened the day in April 2016 that the post-synodal Apostolic Exhortation Amoris Laetitia was released. There was the same kind of fallout over the next 2 or 3 days. Like, well, this was put in a footnote, and he didn't say which sacraments, And I was just, I wasn't on record because I didn't have a podcast then. But I was saying to all my friends, I was saying this is absolutely what I expected. I expected it to be ambiguous. I don't think I used the term weaponized ambiguity. And it's reasonably clear. He has to be talking about one of two of the sacraments. The fact that it's in a footnote makes it a kind of weaponized ambiguity. But it's there. Pope Francis does it again. I was telling Dave, and I were talking. You'll hear from Dave as well, which is natural with weaponized ambiguity. Has a different read of this. And I said, look, it'll be a footnote, in Chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia. That's not a footnote in Chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia. I said, I don't know what it'll be. I don't know how he's so creative with always there's a new innovation, a new way to have weaponized ambiguity. This is it, though, right? He says right at the beginning, hey, what does it mean to officially present something as not only the pontiff, the vicar of Christ on earth, the apostolic lineage of Rome, but also a juridical official. So I can say that my, I took high class. I won the Cali Award in that, not bragging, just saying, in the class of jurisprudence. Didn't do so well in some of my other classes, but there are a couple I really wanted to go for high grade in law school. Jurisprudence is it. In a magisterial document, when you officially present another magisterial document as a head juridical official of the world, the Pope, the pontiff, that is linking it in. Now, what is also necessary, and thank LifeSite for pointing this out, even though they don't seem to be concluding exactly as starkly as I am, as boldly as I am, they pointed it out. In particular, LifeSite writes, in 2018, Pope Francis issued an Apostolic Constitution. It's called Episcopalis Communio, that stipulated the final document of a synod of bishops would become part of the papal magisterium should the Pope approve it. That was new. That's an innovation, like everything in this Francis papacy, and everything of note, rather. Here's the section on point. I spent the morning, early part of this morning, reading, skimming Episcopalis Communio. Here's what it says. This is the key line. It's always one key line in these lengthy Francis documents. Apostolic Episcopalis Communio, the Constitution here. If it is expressly approved by the Roman Pontiff, the final document of a synod participates in the ordinary magisterium of the successor of Peter. So LifeSite pointed it out. At the same time, LifeSite is saying, well, we don't know what this means, which is fair enough to say. I can respect that. But to officially present the document, the final document, instead of directly pulling paragraph 111 out of it, reduplicating as it was in what now turns out to be the penultimate document, achieves the exact same effect. In fact, while it looks like a backpedal, it's more aggressive, because he says in the paragraph above 3, I wish merely to propose a brief framework for reflection that can apply concretely to the life of the Amazon region, a synthesis of some of the larger concerns that I've expressed in earlier documents. So he's linking to his earlier ordinary magisterium, and that can help guide us to a harmonious, creative, and fruitful reception of the entire synodal process. Before that, he says, I wish to offer my own response to this process of dialogue and discernment. He's talking about the synod, October 6th, October 27th of just a few months ago. I will not go into all of the issues treated at length in the final document, nor do I wish to replace that text, meaning he's not going to replace it. He's going to officially present it. He'll tell you the next paragraph. Or to duplicate it. He just means I'm not going to pull from it, right? When you read these words in paragraph 2, it's not 100% clear what he's saying, because he's saying, well, I'm not going to duplicate it, which had been done in parts, right? Paragraph 111, by all accounts, Edward Penton, solid reporting, Professor Roberto De Mattei, solid reporting, had said that it was going to be reduplicated, paragraph 111 from the final document, which is that on priestly celibacy. Now he's just saying, I present to you, the faithful, the entire document, and I want you to go read it. And as noted before, there is a 2018 papal constitution saying, if it is expressly approved by the Roman Pontiff, the final document participates in the ordinary magisterium of the successor of Peter. So I guess it's reasonably clear to me what's happened. I don't want to say what percent confidence, 90 to 95% confidence, that this was an audible called when the quarterback, Pope Francis, saw the look of the defense, I guess in this case Pope Emeritus Benedict and Cardinal Syrah, and probably the American commentariat. Yours truly having a small hand in that. And he just said, look, there's too much, because the Pope Emeritus had this whole endorsement, which for me, Pope Francis constituted a debacle, where he's going directly against the unpacking of the logic of the abrogation of priestly celibacy. I can't get involved in that in this document, whereas I was going to do that before. I was going to reduplicate 111 and then probably say some words on the unpacking the logic required by paragraph 111. I can't be that specific now, so I'm going to stick. It's like being a bank robber. The cops are coming to search your house for a stolen, famous, valuable letter. You stick it right on the mantelpiece, right? You don't hide it under couch cushions or underneath the couch itself. You stick it right on the mantelpiece, and in Poe's famous detective story, it's very difficult to find. That's what we have right up front. It's a quick surprise punch. I'm not gonna duplicate it. I'm not gonna replace it. The final working document, the final document, and I do officially present it to you, and I want you all to go read it. And he says a few times throughout the document that it has global import. Now, there are some other problems. This is it. This is the whole thing. And as of now, notwithstanding my confidence in the juridical surety of what he's doing here, linking to a magisterial document, and also working on the basis of the 2018 Constitution, that makes it pat. And I expect to see in the next weeks and months the Germans coming out and saying, okay, no more priestly celibacy. It is at the same time lonely, disconcerting to be the only one saying that. So other people don't seem to be making this connection yet. I'm not going to, on that basis, not say what jumped right off the page at me. I woke up in the middle of the night knowing that in my time, California time, it would be about 3 a.m. And so I woke up in the 4s and read the document. At first, everyone was reporting, trusted sources like LifeSite were reporting that the libs are going to be disappointed by this, are disappointed by it. It's all breaking right now still. And that this thing was problematic, but not what we were expecting. It reminded me strongly of what happened when Amoris Laetitia came out. And it was, would this really be buried in a footnote? So you're going to hear, people, retrogrades out there, over the next couple days will be the same kind of awakening to yet one more instance of Pope Francis's weaponized ambiguity. Oh my gosh. Just as he, would it really be, would this much of a load-bearing logistical pillar of a major abrogation of communion practice be stuck in a footnote? People were saying that over the next few days, and I was saying, yes, yeah. I mean, that's what he wants to get done. If he has to do it that way, he will roll that way. I'm saying that now. Does this first intro paragraph or paragraphs mean essentially a substitution for the more specific surgical endorsement of the abrogation of priestly celibacy? And also don't sleep on paragraph 103, which I was not betting the farm from the final document of the synod. I was not betting the farm. I gave it a 50-50. Paragraph 103 involves female deaconesses and their ordination or their proposed ordination. The Germans really wanted it. Paragraph 103 now on this, by my read, actually more aggressive. It's more subtle, but it's more aggressive, which sounds paradoxical, but it's not. Because he says I'm officially presenting to you, he's doing it juridically in a magisterial document, the entire final document. This is actually an enhancement of what allegedly, last week came out was a leaked version of the document, which only reproduced paragraph 111 on priestly celibacy. 103 reads, In the various consultations carried out in the Amazon region, the fundamental role of religious and lay women and their communities in the Church of the Amazon region was recognized and emphasized, given the multiple services that they offer. For this reason, the topic was also very present in the Synod. Already in 2016, Pope Francis had created a study commission on the women's diaconate, which as a commission arrived at a partial conclusion regarding the nature of the diaconate of women in the first centuries of the Church and its implications for today. Therefore, we would like to share our experiences and reflections with the Commission and wait for its results. This sounds like it will be pending because paragraph 103 on the actual Apostolic Exhortation, Currida Amazonia, Pope Francis not only, he doesn't do what we thought he was going to do, just pull out paragraph 111. He essentially is presenting paragraphs 103 together with 111 and all the ones in between them and before them. In a way, it's a heightening of the aggression of the plan. And basically everything else, most other aspects of the document are, on my interpretation, which is, I feel confident in, but I'm not certain, a general kind of reaction to the defense that Pope Francis saw forming around priestly celibacy against the women diaconate. And it's really clever. It's more weaponized ambiguity. It's incredible that he knows all these means of doing weaponized ambiguity. Really, really remarkable. There's some other kind of throwaway bad points. According to LifeSite, later in the document, Pope Francis seems to defend the veneration of the Pachamama statue of the Synod. No shocker there, though this is a magisterial document where he's doing it, so that's not good. He applies the Amoris Laetitia approach to sacraments in the Amazon context, saying there is no room for a discipline that excludes and turns people away. So it's the next post-synodal apostolic exhortation, 4 years after, almost 4 years, 4 years minus 2 months after Amoris Laetitia, and he's doubling down on that footnote. So people be especially astute, be keen to the pattern here. For the first month really after Amoris Laetitia came out, people were saying he wouldn't make a major disciplinary and doctrinal change in a footnote in chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia. Well, he did, and he's doubling down on it. He's saying the Amoris Laetitia approach to sacraments, giving communion to the civilly divorced or remarried, does not allow, quote, room for a discipline that excludes and turns people away. So just apply this exhortation over the next weeks and months. We're going to see the Germans doing it for him, his buddies. And, maybe by the next apostolic exhortation, he'll be doubling down and it'll already, which is no surprise. This is not a shocker. Because, remember, just a few short months after April 2016, the Argentine bishops applied that footnote in the way that all the skeptics, the cynics, thought it should be applied. And Francis said, you have the only correct interpretation, give communion to the civilly divorced and remarried. There's also another throwaway point. This is important. Now, it's not as important as paragraph 103 from the Synod document, the final Synod document, but it insinuates it. Plus, of course, the whole thing is being officially presented. He says that women should be given formal positions in the community that include a, quote, commission from the bishop. I didn't research that because I was researching the Constitution from 2018. What does a commission from the bishop mean? What would it do? Strange. We know what they're trying to do, though. It's reasonably certain. He recommends granting lay people formal authority of Amazonian parishes, mentions their ability to celebrate certain sacraments, not the Eucharist and confession. Those are specifically excluded. And he talks about the beautiful earth ceremonies of the enculturated Amazonian people and how they should be a template for us. They're exemplary. Remarkable stuff. We nothing more remarkable, nothing more striking or shocking than what we saw at the Amazon Synod itself. Except remember, this is a magisterial document that is now linking any of the dangerous ideas of the Synod or the Synod documents to the timeless magisterium, or what he's trying to make the timeless ordinary magisterium of his 266th pontificate. So, where Dave and I, it's entirely appropriate, I think, to, in the hour I woke up early to do this, to give a couple different reflections on it. I'm looking at this thing through suspicious, squinted eyes. You'll hear what Dave thinks, and who's to say? Watch though. Just tell everyone you heard it here first. There's going to be shuffling. There's going to be the interpretive absorption, right? There's always interpretive absorption. Like you absorb a blow in boxing and you're kind of like waiting the next 3 seconds. How much did that hurt me? Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 seconds for it to sink in. People seem to think this is a kind of weird, unsteady, staid victory for conservatives and a loss for liberals. I don't think so at all, and I'm confident here. He opens with, I'm officially presenting the documents. When you do so as a juridical official, this is an absolute endorsement of the document, and he's doing it magisterially, and he had this 2018 Constitution set up. He knew he had it set up so that it can look like he's going right and he's going left. It's just a juke. It's just another footnote from Amoris Laetitia. He wasn't going to do it the exact same way, because now we know to look out for footnotes, right? All right, so I'm curious. I'm going to go read the other trusted sources. I'm going to read the untrusted sources. I suggest you guys do the same. It's always a surprise, but it's not a surprise with Francis. Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Whatever stupid truisms you want to throw out there, platitudes, I think they apply. And, I'm going to be absorbing this, but I'm prepared to stand by this prediction. The words are clear. They're just really pithy and terse, and they're right up front. And then one gets caught reading all the details of the rest of the document, and his documents are always reasonably long. So everything's there up front. It's front-loaded. Have a look for yourself at Carita Amazonia. I don't know what to say. It's wild. This is just strange days are ours when this is the way that the pontificate operates. God be with us all. God bless you, parish orphans and retrogrades out there, and I hope to see you in 2 days for the next installment of Rules for Retrogrades. Have a great day, and enjoy Dave's commentary as well.
How's it going, everybody? Retrogrades out there. This is Dave Gordon. I'm here in the wake of the Pope Francis Apostolic Exhortation, and I was going to give you my interpretation of it. You just got Tim's, and we thought it best to kind of give you our own personal viewpoints. So I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown of Carita Amazonia, the post-synodal apostolic exhortation of Pope Francis. Today, Pope Francis put out his post-synodal apostolic exhortation. As you know, there was a great deal of disquietude and uneasiness leading up to the exhortation, because the synodal process had been beset by a seeming openness to initiatives stemming from the most radical and progressive wing of the Church. Among these initiatives was the proposal to have viri probati, married men in the priesthood, in the Amazon. Which many saw as a Trojan horse to introduce the married priesthood into the Latin Rite of the Church. As you know, there was this claimed exigency where there's too few priests in the Amazon. So progressives in the Church had suggested, well, why don't we just have married men be priests, and then we could get more vocations and there wouldn't be this dearth of priests. But many saw that as a Trojan horse to introduce the married priesthood into the Latin Rite, because then what's to stop the German bishops and other secularized countries from saying, well, we have a priest shortage too, so we can have married priests also. There were also proposals, which did not end up making it into the final synod document, regarding having female deacons in the region. But there were also proposals for a more robust women's ministry in general. Finally, there were whisperings of certain moral offenses being fabricated, kind of created out of thin air, that didn't have a basis in the Church's tradition. And these would be like ecological sins. There's kind of this creeping environmentalism that people were fearing because it's a novelty in the church's doctrine. Obviously, we have a duty to be good stewards of the earth, but that's to take care of the earth for our sake, for the sake of mankind, not for the earth's own sake. In the end, none of these things were present in the post-synodal exhortation of Pope Francis, even though, they were there in some form, whether in explicit form or kind of implied or hoped for in the final synodal document. So the document, rather than being something that has a great deal of error in it, it's much more like a cautionary letter drafted by a father concerned for the well-being of his sons vis-a-vis their social, cultural, and ecclesial lives in an age fraught with peril. I mean, that's what really kind of bleeds through. You get a sense that Pope Francis truly was concerned about the Amazon region and kind of the upheaval that's happening there, both social and political and economical, and that he's upset about the state of disarray that the church is in there as well. So now, many, including Tim, I gather from our discussion this morning in the wake of the document coming out, in the wake of the Apostolic Exhortation coming out, they're arguing that because Pope Francis stated that he would like to officially present the final synodal document, which sets forth the conclusion of the synod, that he was approving that document, and then therefore it became part of the ordinary magisterium of the church. In other words, the document itself is now binding and on par with Pope Francis's Apostolic Exhortation in its effect. The argument is that in the 2018 document, Episcopalis Communio, Article 18, Section 1, Pope Francis changed the rules governing synods with regard to their final documents, so that if the final document of the synod is expressly approved, quote, expressly approved by the Roman pontiff, the final document participates in the ordinary magisterium of the successor of Peter, alongside the post-synodal exhortation. Put differently, that it would have actual official magisterial weight in the church and would bind the faithful in the same manner that a papal statement would, that the apostolic exhortation of the Pope would, which ordinarily a synodal document would not have. It would not have its own magisterial authority. However, you have to note that this tacit papal approval of a final synod document only takes place pursuant to canon law if the exhortation is expressly approved by the Roman pontiff. So express approval is just that, express. Express means explicit. It means unambiguous, leaving no room for doubt whatsoever. It's a credulity-defying stretch to argue that Pope Francis is saying that he is presenting the final document means that he is expressly approving the final document. To say that one is presenting something does not mean that they are giving their express approval to it. It means that they're taking some of what's in it and, giving this to the world. It doesn't mean you're ratifying each and every word of it. So, indeed, nowhere does Pope Francis ever state or suggest that he means to approve the final document of the synod in toto. Rather, his statement that he's officially presenting it seems to imply that he's going to summarize the findings of the synod, which he then does. Moreover, he says that he wishes to offer his own response to the synodal process, his own response, and that he is not going to duplicate or replace the synodal text. So he explicitly says, I do not want to duplicate or replace the synodal text. And finally, he says he prefers not to cite the final document in his exhortation. Hence, Pope Francis is not merely reiterating the final synodal document or accepting it at face value. Rather, he's adding to it and amending it. All officials involved with the process confirm that Pope Francis was not approving the final document. That's important. The Vatican's official interpretation also is that Pope Francis was not approving the final synodal document. So Cardinal Michael Czerny, the special secretary of the Amazon Synod, stated explicitly, so we have two documents of two different kinds. The final document, consisting of proposals made and voted by the Synod Fathers, has the weight of a synodal final document, whereas the Apostolic Exhortation, reflecting on the whole process and its final document, has the authority of ordinary magisterium of the successor of Peter. So these are two documents of two different levels of authority. The first, the synodal document, has no magisterial authority whatsoever. The second, the latter, which is the Apostolic Exhortation of Pope Francis, has the authority of the ordinary magisterium of the Pope. It goes on. Pope Francis encourages everyone to read the whole document, Czerny stated, but Czerny added that suggestions made in the Synod's final document remain in discussion only as proposals made by the Synod. Proposals. This means that Catholics aren't required to believe or agree with or assent to the proposals or regard them as teachings of the Pope. Matteo Bruni, director of the Holy See Press Office, also emphasized that the final document of the Synod is not binding magisterium. Bruni said that, quote, the Apostolic Exhortation is magisterium, the final document is not, end quote. And he added later that, quote, anything in the final document should be read in the lens of the Apostolic Exhortation, end quote. Finally, Cardinal Lorenzo Baldisseri, the Secretary General of the Synod of Bishops, confirmed the two former interpretations, saying, quote, that Article 18 of Episcopalis Communio, which established that law, makes clear that the Pope needs to give his approval expressly, end quote. He said, quote, the Apostolic Exhortation does not speak of approval of the final document. It does not speak of it. It speaks of presentation, but not of approval, end quote. And then he goes on, actually. There's not a clear canonical word of approval, as in Article 18 of Episcopalis Communio. It speaks of express approval, not indirect or imagined, end quote. So there's no reason to believe that Pope Francis is in any way expressly adopting the Synod's final document. As such, we don't need to worry about weary probati or the unnatural and expansive roles being pondered for women in the Church's leadership or ecological sin. We can simply look to the Apostolic Exhortation in the wake of the Synod as the magisterial document. The Synod, the final Synod document, has no magisterial authority whatsoever, and it can be kind of just relegated to the ash heap of history, at least insofar as it's errant. Okay, so we kind of touched on that, a bit of the controversial angle, but now what about just the substance of the exhortation? What does it cover? So it's broken into 4 chapters, and each one kind of represents a dream. Pope Francis was a little bit artistic when he drafted this up. So the first was a social dream, and second is a cultural dream. Third is an ecological dream, and fourth is an ecclesial dream, or what his vision for the church in Amazonia is. Now, we have Cardinal Mueller, who's kind of been off and on a friend and ally, or sometimes on the outs with this pontificate. And he says, in the first 3 chapters of this letter, everyone can only agree with the Holy Father with all their heart. This does not exclude the possibility that some details could be evaluated differently by experts or even presented in greater detail. But the whole text is a pastoral letter of prophetic power that cannot be read like a dispassionate scientific study. Nor can the criteria of a theological textbook be applied in a know-it-all manner, because it is about proclaiming the liberating power of the gospel of Christ and not an academic study. And that was very much my sense too. You can tell that the Holy Father is passionate about what he's writing here. I think he really sees the plight of the people in the Amazon region, and he's really reaching out and calling the attention of the entire church to these people so that he can beg for relief for them from, ecological problems, but also just problems with the functioning of the church in that region. So, number one, I was pleased to see that there was none of the disordered environmentalism that we kind of spoke about earlier in terms of ecological sin. As a matter of fact, a great quote from Pope Francis in it is, "We do not need an environmentalism that is concerned for the biome but ignores the Amazonian peoples." So, again, in Catholic theology, we always have to put people up here. And then the dignity of the environment and animals, it's only filtered through human dignity that those things have what could be called like an analogous dignity, but they don't have one of their own. It's only in their relation to us, only by virtue of the fact that they sustain our life, the life of the human being, which the Catechism in Vatican II taught was the only thing that was willed into existence for its own sake by God. So Pope Francis also says, do strive to protect the ecological treasures of the Amazon region, though in keeping with the common good of man. He's arguing that the treasures of Amazonia, the rainforest, and just the natural resources of the region, which are plentiful, should be preserved, partly because they're going to be there for the human race at a later time, but partly because, the flora and fauna of the region are so diverse and beautiful that they reflect the actual glory of God, right? They show the pulchritude, the beauty of the divine mind, that it can even come up with these various things. So we don't have a right to just go wipe them out willy-nilly. So that's a bit of the ecological aspect of it. Pope Francis also warns to beware of consumerism, which is fueling a kind of a globalization and a new colonization. He argues that, and this is something I think that everybody in suburbia could hear, is that the emptier a person's heart is, the more he or she needs things to buy, own, and consume. So, the mark of the full heart, the heart filled with grace, is a detachment from material goods, which is something, especially in the first world, in the Western world, that's something we could all hear. The Pope also says that there needs to be an effort on the part of people to kind of get along, for lack of a better term, to socialize and to come and fraternize in a spirit of understanding with one another. So that there aren't warring factions. The Amazon region is home to various groups of people, various different, factions of people, and there shouldn't be a spirit of dissent or disharmony among them. They should kind of deal with each other in a spirit of understanding. So he treats that, and he also talks about how to evangelize. He's very firm that the Amazon region needs to be evangelized. It can't just be neglected. And he talks about enculturation. Now, a lot of times when we hear the word enculturation, it's something we recoil from, because it calls to mind a sort of syncretism in the minds of the faithful, because that's how it's been used in the last 50 years. You're thinking, when you hear enculturation, that the church is going to go, and instead of lifting something up to God, instead of lifting it up to the high and lofty doctrines of the church and our high standards, the church is going to be dragged down itself. And instead of us evangelizing the world is going to evangelize us. But Pope Francis, in the exhortation, actually makes clear that that's not what he wants. What he means by enculturation is to leave in place what is true about a culture while evangelizing it and converting it to Christianity. So he says, on one hand, a fruitful process takes place when the gospel takes root in a given place. For whenever a community receives the message of salvation, the Holy Spirit enriches its culture with the transforming power of the gospel. On the other hand, the church herself undergoes a process of reception that enriches her with the fruits of what the Spirit has already mysteriously sown in that culture. So, and the church has taught this for time immemorial, right? Even going back to the apostles. The apostles went out to different cultures. They went to different locales and they evangelized. But they didn't just go and say, you have to get rid of all of your customs, even the ones that are salutary and good. No. And this is why we have different rites in the church. The apostles and later bishops would evangelize a culture and they would say, whatever is not dissonant with the Catholic faith, the truths of the Catholic faith, that can be retained. Whatever can fit within our faith, whatever is true, good, and beautiful from your culture, and that fits with our faith, that can be retained. But they did, of course, insist on getting rid of, jettisoning the bad stuff that doesn't mesh with the Christian culture, with the true gospel, right? So Pope Francis is making it clear that this is his understanding as well. He says that the history of the church shows that Christianity does not have simply one cultural expression, and we would not do justice to the logic of the Incarnation if we thought Christianity was monocultural and monotonous. And that's true. Again, we have the Eastern rites. We have the Syrah Malabar rite. We have various, exceptions even within the Latin rite. We can offer people to come in from the Anglican Church, and we try and take what they did that was harmonious with the Catholic faith and embrace it for them so that it can be an authentic expression of the gospel. And of course, whatever doesn't fit with the true gospel, that people have to leave behind. But so it's not this kind of syncretism that we would fear. And that was my impression going into it. There was something that was a little disconcerting. There seemed to be a bit of defensiveness in the exhortation about the Pachamama scandal, which, I don't like, because we had an idol in the Vatican, this goddess idol, which, as we know from St. Paul, all the pagan gods are demons. So it's absolutely inexcusable. The Pachamama debacle was truly idolatry, and it was a real problem. So there was defensiveness that I kind of picked up on in the exhortation, where Pope Francis is saying, let us not be quick to describe as superstition or paganism certain religious practices that arise spontaneously from the life of peoples. And then he goes on to say, it's possible to take up an indigenous symbol in some way without necessarily considering it as idolatry. A myth charged with spiritual meaning can be used to advantage and not always considered a pagan error. Some religious festivals have a sacred meaning and are occasions for gathering and fraternity, albeit in need of a gradual process of purification or maturation. A missionary of souls will try to discover the legitimate needs and concerns that seek an outlet at times imperfect, partial, or mistaken religious expressions, and will attempt to respond to them with enculturated spirituality. So what Pope Francis is saying is that, on the road to kind of purifying these cultures of what is not consonant with Christianity, we should be kind of loath to just color something as straight idolatry. Now, here's why that's wrong. There's certain things we can't tolerate, and breaches of the first commandment are among them. You can't even tolerate them on the way to purifying a culture of its ties to paganism. There's just, it's straight intolerable. It's not something that can for a second be abided within the church. And so he's kind of saying, abide these things on the road to purifying the culture of them, but that's not an area where we can compromise. And I think he might be thinking of it kind of like how St. Patrick would use the clover to even talk about the Trinity. St. Patrick converted Ireland by talking about the Trinity and pointing to the three-leaf clover and saying, you see three leaves, it makes up one plant, just like the three persons of the Holy Trinity make up one God. So Pope Francis is saying, you can look to these things that are kind of partial truths in other cultures and use them to evangelize those cultures. But there's no partial truth that you can point to in an idol. There's nothing good or redeeming about an idol there in the way that there is about a three-leaf clover, where you can say, oh, well, this thing is acceptable and I'm going to use it as a teaching aid. No, idols are inherently evil. We are to render worship to the one God and the one God alone, the Holy Trinity. Everything else has to be dispatched with vigor and verve, right? So there was that bit of defensiveness there, and that was the most troublesome thing that I saw in the document. Going on from there, Pope Francis spoke about the need for the priestly ministry in especially the Amazon region. He was talking about how it is problematic that people are not having access to the Holy Eucharist, to confession, to the sacraments in general. And he says that no Christian community is built up which does not grow from and hinge on the celebration of the Most Holy Eucharist. But I was really encouraged to see that he also says, this leads me to believe, to urge all bishops, especially those in Latin America, not only to promote prayer for priestly vocations, but to be more generous in encouraging those who display a missionary vocation to opt for the Amazon region. And if you remember on Rules for Retrogrades, we spoke earlier, in an earlier episode, about, if I were in Pope Francis's shoes, I wouldn't be considering viri probati. I would be issuing a call to the young men of the world, issuing a challenge to the young men of the world to rise up and come and minister in a priestly capacity to this kind of impoverished, this spiritually impoverished region. So he does take up that call. He is saying that we need a missionary spirit, a missionary vocation to that region. So I was encouraged to see that. He also calls for, in the absence of priests to minister to this region, an increase in the role of the laity, which under canon law is allowed. In extraordinary circumstances, laity can take on even leadership roles at the parish level when there are no priests available. That's part of canon law. Now, if there's a priest available, there's no such thing as a lay-run parish, right? There's a hierarchy in the church. The priest stands in persona Christi, and as you know from Ephesians 5, Christ is the head, and the Christians, we are the mystical body of Christ. So, and the priest being in persona Christi with his parishioners making up the mystical body of Christ. This is that analogy being played out on like a local parish level. So there's no lay-run parishes, but in the absence of a priest to perform ministry at the parish level, then as an exception in these extraordinary circumstances, the laity can take a role, and Pope Francis points to that canon in canon law. Now, another thing I was encouraged to see was that Pope Francis really seemed to foreclose on the issue of women deacons once and for all. He says, this summons us to broaden our vision, lest we restrict our understanding of the church to the church's functional structures. Such a reductionism would lead us to believe that women would be granted a greater status and participation in the church if only they were admitted to holy orders. But that approach would in fact narrow our vision. It would lead us to clericalize women, diminish the great value of what they have already accomplished, and subtly make their indispensable contribution less effective. And then he also goes on to specify that women have a unique role that is distinct from that of men in the church. He says that men have a Christ-like role in the church, and women have a Marian role in the church. So, of course, Mary lived a veiled life. She lived a life behind the scenes. Even in the book of Acts, when at Pentecost, Mary is present in the upper room, and she receives the Holy Spirit as a tongue of flame. And while the apostles go out and gain 3,000 converts, Mary does not go out preaching with them. So, Pope Francis says women, quote, women, by the Women make their contribution to the church in a way that is properly theirs by making present the tender strength of Mary, the mother. So he definitely distinguishes between the role of men and women, and he appears to, at this point, definitively close, at least for the time of his pontificate, the question of bringing women into holy orders. He says that he is not prepared to admit women to holy orders, or he at least implies that in a way that I feel is inescapable. And seeing as how that was one of the things that we were most worried about, even above the weary probati, the married priesthood, which of course already exists in some form in the Eastern rites. I think everybody was most worried about the issue of deaconesses, because the sacrament of holy orders, the church has taught, can only be conferred upon men. So if the church were to walk back what it's taught about holy orders, this would be kind of contradicting something that's been at least an infallible part of the ordinary magisterium from the beginning. That is my rundown of the Apostolic Exhortation of Pope Francis. We're still digesting it. Sometimes in the wake of big ecclesial news, it takes a little bit of time to digest things and for the church to really see and to parse apart what the Holy Father meant when he said certain things. But I think that's a good rundown for today. I hope to see you guys back on our next show. Thank you for being with us, and God bless you. Please keep supporting Rules for Retrogrades. I will be posting to my Patreon account a new article that I've written about feminism in the upcoming weeks here, probably next week, I would say. And, I'll see you guys next show. Thank you very much.